Welcome to the NAPO podcast. Today we are joined by three respected figures in the trade union movement to discuss what matters most, density or activism. If you're interested in how we can build a sustainable and effective labour movement, this is not to be missed. So to start off with, can you all introduce yourselves, give us a bit of background to your unions? Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Woolley, the General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union. We organise across the food sector from field to fork, manufacturing to retail to hospitality, representing workers in some of the most low paid and precarious parts of the economy. And although other unions would argue with us, we are the oldest trade union in the UK. Our history goes right back to 1847, and we've always done things a little bit differently, focusing on grassroots organising, member-led campaigns, and building power in workplaces and communities.
Hi, I'm Henry Fowler. I'm the Assistant General Secretary at the General Federation of Trades Unions. The GFTU is only 127 years old, so can't be as old as Sarah's BFAWU. We represent 30 affiliates, over 500,000 trade union members and community organisations. Our main tenets, principles that we were founded on, were education, solidarity and unity in action. And the role of the Federation today is to provide online and in-person educational work to build and grow the movement, and to provide the space for unions in the same sector to work together, to build joint demands, and also to be at the heart of building solidarity for struggles within this country and internationally as well.
Hi, my name's Ranjit Singh. I'm the Assistant General Secretary at NAPO. So we're a trade union and professional association representing members working in probation in England and Wales, and for the Probation Board of Northern Ireland, and for staff working in CAFCAS. And CAFCAS is the Children and Family Court Advisory Support Service. And we're only 114 years old, so we're the baby in amongst this group. So yeah, our members include probation officers, support service officers, family court advisors, and generally staff working in roles that support rehabilitation and public protection. And because we are both a professional association and a trade union, members join for a mix of reasons, whether that's professional identity, place protection, and collective voice. And that combination, I would say, gives us a unique perspective on how professional values and trade union activism can work together to improve both working conditions and the quality of public services that we provide.
So when we talk about trade union power today, what matters more? How many members we have or how active and organised those members are? I'll go to Henry.
So I think to contextualise an answer to this, we have to look at the trends and what's happening within the political and trade union space over a long period of time. So we are now at around 22% of all workers are in a trades union. That's a historic low from its height in 1979, where there was over 13 million. But most importantly, lots of workers are not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. That was 80% in 1917. And that has combined to change the trade union landscape and also the way that trade unions operate within the political world. And so when we look at, is it membership size versus engaged members or members that are prepared to take action, we have to think about those things. We should also not overlook the impact of neoliberalism on our entire country, our society, but also the anti-trade union laws that's brought, and also the huge destruction of working people's lives, terms and conditions, and the hopes for their future and for their children's future. So I think that we have two things facing the trade union movement when it comes to answering this question. One is, how do we organise the unorganised? That's 80% of all workers. But then also, how do we utilise the organisation we have to build power and meaningful power that makes change, that then moves people to want to join the trades union? What I will say is, having lots of members that aren't necessarily active isn't going to be the be all and end all. It's how we use our activism, and it's how we use strategically the power that we have, whether that's looking at supply chains and where we organise. We may organise 3 workers, but they may be responsible for the stock exchange in London. Those 3 workers obviously have a lot of power within the supply chain of global financial capitalism. So it's thinking about those things and how we move and build the movement stronger. What I would say is, just building lots and lots of members isn't in itself going to deliver worker power.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Henry was saying, I mean, For me, it isn't really an either or question. Union power does come from both membership density and active participation, in my view. They're two sides of the same coin. The numbers on the one hand give us legitimacy and bargaining strength and ultimately credibility with employers, and then governments will sit up and listen, when you have a large proportion of the workforce that is organised. But I would also argue that numbers don't alone on their own create power unless members are willing to act collectively. And that requires leadership. So I do think that leadership within the trade union movement to galvanise and motivate is important. Activism without numbers can struggle to sustain the change that we want to see happen. So the real goal, I would say, is about building large memberships that are engaged, that are organised, and that they have the confidence to act together. And through providing that leadership through the unions, I think, that can be achieved.
I agree with everything that's already been said, but I possibly want to give a couple of examples. When our members went out on strike in McDonald's in 2017 in the two stores, Crayford and Cambridge, there was less than 20 people that balloted for industrial action across those two stores, but they took it anyway. And yes, they didn't get everything that they wanted to achieve, but what they did do was get rid of the bullying managers at each of the stores, and that kind of then had a trickle effect on other people then wanting to get involved and being active. And it kind of follows on from what's been said about seeing things. On the flip side, we've got some branches where we've got 100% membership on site. And if the employer tomorrow took away their paid breaks, there would be no action. They wouldn't stand up. They'd go, "Oops, we've lost that." And there's a difference there. So I think they've got to complement each other, haven't they? You don't build activists without having members, but it's pointless having millions of members if they're not going to push back when something's being taken away from them. So I think, we've we need active and organised members to build a movement that's going to be around for another 175 plus years. And some of that's got to be workers organising workers, yes, led by leadership as well, as Ranjit said, but there's something special about workers reinforcing and building and empowering each other like the McDonald's members did.
So, with that being said, do you think that the movement has become too focused on recruitment numbers rather than building activism, Sarah?
Yeah, I think in all honesty it has, and you can see that through some of the campaigns that are being run. There's some fantastic work going on in the movement, don't get me wrong, but if it's about like how big can we get? How big can an individual trade union get? Rather than how big can we make our movement? We've got to focus. We've got to go back to basics, haven't we? People don't join the BFAW because I'm the general secretary and I stand up and give a bit of a speech, or we put something out on social media, or we stand on a factory gate giving out a leaflet. People join because they can see what's happening and what's improved in their workplace as a result of acting collectively, building them, empowering them, giving them confidence to be the organisers of the union movement of the future and now.
Yeah, I mean, similarly to what was saying, I think, is it a question of we have a temptation to focus on numbers because it's measurable and it's often tied to then how much influence we can have with the employer. But recruitment alone isn't enough for members who remain passive, and we need to look at how we sort of motivate and activate those members to actually do things. And I'll use an example in terms of how doing one in terms of raising activism then has an impact in terms of recruitment. So we've just been through a pay ballot, and we've seen through the duration of that pay ballot a lot more members become active. And as them being active in the workplace, it's led to a huge increase in recruitment. And over the last 12 months, we've seen a 10% recruitment or more in our membership. And that has been on the back of members getting active. So the most effective unions, from what I can see, are those that do focus on organising rather than just servicing members. And, we need to make sure as well that to enable members to be active, that we do need to build the workplace structures, we do need to develop and support reps and give members the confidence and encourage them to speak up. And then it gives us the opportunities for creating, vehicles for taking collective action. So, in other words, recruitment should be the start of the journey, but definitely not the end of it.
And what do you think, Henry?
I think that's spot on, and I think I'm going to be a bit stronger than that and go as far as to say that the idea of that we create independent recruitment strategies that recruit in an abstract vacuum, which is what the trade union movement in large has done in lots of places for a long period of time under the guise of organising, has fundamentally failed. We're at historic lows of union membership, so that strategy, which lots of people, I've been involved in unions where I've gone to recruitment fairs with things to give away, and giving away a soft squidgy ball or a keychain isn't going to lead to some kind of relationship with the trades union. I think that we have to start to fundamentally have a break with that thinking. And as we said, focus on activity that are issues member led, that have a clear action that people can take, that you're saying to people, you're being honest, this is what we're going to need you to do, and this will lead to this improvement. Not go in and say to people, become active, become a workplace rep. It's really easy and you can do it in your day job. That's the wrong expectation around how we're developing and building activists. But the idea that it would be done in the abstract of issue-led campaigns that members and workers care about, I think has largely been seen to have failed. And where it has been successful, it has only led to a temporary relationship with that union and then huge churn. And we've seen huge levels of people joining unions and leaving unions. And I want to also be honest, recruitment equals money. So for lots of trade unions, this is a budgetary thing around maintaining our offices, maintaining our staff, maintaining our organisation within a competitive landscape. And so the drive to generate revenue, I understand, and we should be honest about that rather than hiding about that. Recruiting, we don't recruit members just for the sake of it. A lot of that recruitment is about the trade unions' longevity, etc. But ultimately, that approach that I outlined hasn't been successful, as the figures show. So a rethink, a reboot, and I think a broader union strategy, especially around newer sectors in comma, where we're united to organise more workers into trade unions, is of absolute paramount importance, especially with the potential political futures that we face. The role of active trade unions is going to be a vital part of our entire society.
So, Henry, the GFTU works with unions that may not have huge membership numbers, but can still be really influential. Have you seen instances where smaller unions with strong activism are able to punch harder than larger unions with more passive members?
Yeah, absolutely. The GFTU represents normally specialist unions. We have some that are much larger than others and some that are a bit smaller, that's for sure. So it's a broad range, but normally specialist unions. And we see, it's not just because Sarah's on the podcast, but Sarah knows that I think this anyway, is that we see that for me, the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union provides a model that enables people to see that although it doesn't have huge membership, that it is a member-driven organisation that you would want to join and be a part of, and you're going to be a part of it because it's there to improve the conditions of workers and build a fairer and better society. That social justice angle, I think, is really clear and strong in what the Bakers Union does, and as a result of that, it's seen as an organisation in lots of spaces on the political and trade union field and our society and our communities, that it is active and punches way above its weight in terms of membership size. But to go back to the kind of previous conversation, is that we have unions within the GFTU who have lots of different sections as part of that makeup. And some of people are in smaller bargaining units where there's not that many of them in an employer landscape. So even though they're part of a bigger union, their workplace dynamic, whether it be at a branch or actually at the workplace, they have less members. But I would say that the engagement, mobilisation and organising and the discussion around what we mean by organising is a big debate in the movement at the moment. We should also recognise that our ability to engage, mobilise members, we do have anti-trade union laws which deliberately make us re-engage with members, which in a good way. Like the 50% threshold is a punitive anti-trade union law and it should be abolished, and the Labour government should be abolishing it as I'm talking right now. But the reality that we have to engage with members to build that level of people want to take the action and speak with members in a more concentrated way, that in of itself is not a bad thing. And there are lots of trade unions now that smash those thresholds all the time. But it doesn't mean we can ignore some of the low levels of engagement. But I don't want to abide by the idea that trade union activity, whether that be in an individual union or more broader, the dogma that we have also of you need a super majority. This idea that unless you've got 80% of workers want to do this one thing, you can't take the action. Our history is littered with examples from the national minority movement of the 20s to the rank and file work actions in the building trade in the 90s, and most recently in Birmingham with the blocking of wagons, that small groups of activists deployed in really strong, powerful ways can have a huge impact on levels of engagement, but also outcome that then other workers see and go, I'll be part of that because I can see what they're able to do. And I don't think that correlates to the size of the union is what I'm trying to say. The GFTU has lots of sister unions who are in a multi-union environment where people are recruiting against each other for workers. Like I said, 80% of people are in a worker, so in the unions, you can't believe that people are trying to recruit across each other when there's so many people to recruit to unions. But we do have that. So I think what the GFTU can do is provide a space for building some industrial unity so that when we're going to the employer, we've got a clear side. And again, that unity encourages people to become involved in it. If you see unions fighting with each other about different levels of who should organise which groups of workers, I don't think that that plays very well with workers. But I'll go on to say that if you look at people that have tried to theorise why people get engaged, how you move beyond people being in membership of a trade union to active in it, John Kelly, for me, sets out a framework. It's not a new framework. It's relatively old now, but it's a framework nevertheless. And it says you need these 5 key elements, right? And I think these are critical, regardless of union size. So you need a sense of injustice when you're wanting to mobilise or organise people. You need to be able to attribute blame. So who is the target of what we're trying to change within our society? A collective identity, which is the trade union, the vehicle for change, but then also that leadership and organisation. And that's at the workplace and at the branch level. And as Sarah's articulated and Ranjit, that's not something from an HQ of a union. That's at every level of our trade union. Leadership shouldn't be thought of as general secretaries. Leadership needs to be, can you move a group of workers in your workplace to a collective action? So having a clear roadmap, having a plan that the entire union, from the staff all the way through to members, reps, branches, whatever your structures are, that is coherent and everyone is aligned, is absolutely critical to how we win. And it's that, for me, that is more fundamental than the size of the trades union or its apparent ability to punch above its weight.
Sarah, your union has built a reputation for grassroots organising and visible campaigns. From your experience, does activism actually help grow union membership, or do you need density first before activism becomes effective?
So I gave a bit of an example earlier around our McDonald's members going out on strike in 2017, and we didn't have a huge amount of density. I think there was 110-ish people working in both of their stores, so it wasn't a massive amount of people that that went out on strike and were seen as being active. But we do believe activism drives growth. When workers see that the union's visible, that it's fighting, that it wins, and that win doesn't necessarily have to be huge. That win could just be making sure that there's toast at break time for free, that people can eat, because it's made a change and a positive change to their life. It doesn't have to be going out on weeks worth of strike action to get a pay increase. I think that's what makes people and encourages people to join. They've seen something change, they've felt something change. Like I say, whether that is access to some food at break without worrying that you can afford it, or whether it's a pay increase. I think in some areas, I don't think it's like a straightforward everybody fits into the same box, because in some places people are scared to even join a union. You know, look at McDonald's; they're inherently anti-union as an employer worldwide. So building some density, even if it's just half a dozen people, in the first instance, gives people the confidence that they're not acting alone, doesn't it? And then you build from there. But I also think as a movement, and it kind of follows on from some of the stuff that Henry was saying, activists aren't always necessarily just trade union activists. There might be climate activists, there might be LGBT activists, there might be community activists. And I think we've got a job of work to do as a movement to go to them rather than expect them to come to us. So why would a community activist get involved in their trade union if they can't see their trade union in the community? Why would a climate change activist get involved if they can't see that the trade union's talking about climate? So we've got to make sure that members are leading that, and we're giving activists every opportunity to get involved that they want to. But it's a cycle, isn't it? You organise workers as an action, you win an action, you win something that produces positive change collectively, you grow, and then you repeat that cycle, don't you? Because 80% of workers aren't in a trade union, so we've got a lot of growing and repeating to do. Confidence, trust, and showing collective action works is how we grow the movement. And not just the Bakers Union, we've been involved in lots of things that have grown other unions. And I think that's important too, moving outside of our own silos and understanding that we are a movement, not just one union, is really, really important.
Ranjit, NAPO is in a unique position being a professional association as well as a trade union, so many members may be motivated to join for different reasons. Do you think that presents any challenges when it's time to get members to mobilise?
Yes, I mean, that is a really interesting question for us at NAPO, because we've been a professional body much longer than we've been a trade union. As I said at the beginning of this course, we were started in 1912. We're 114 years old. We became a certified registered trade union in the 70s. I think it was 1976 that we got registered as a trade union. So, we've got this long history of being the professional body for probation officers. And, a lot of people will join initially for that support and that advice or professional representation rather than activism in the traditional sense of being a member of a trade union. And that can create challenges when we're asking members to mobilise, whether that's for the wider sort of civil society sort of campaigning or lobbying, or even if we want to take industrial action. But it also creates opportunities for us being a professional body. NAPO members working in both probation and in CAFCAS, they're deeply committed to the values of rehabilitation, giving children a voice, public safety, and professional integrity. So when workplace issues start to undermine those values, for example, we have a campaign at the moment around excessive workloads or unsafe staffing levels or around health and safety, that can be a real powerful motivator for collective action as well. So the key is connecting those workplace conditions with professional ethics and the quality of service that is being provided.
Some people say that unions have shifted more towards a service model where they provide support to members rather than acting as a campaigning movement. Do you think that's true? And if it is it just adapting to the modern workforce? Sarah?
I think we've definitely moved towards a service model, and you can see that with some of the conversations around, trade unions are like an insurance policy. If you're not, you wouldn't insure your house after it had burnt down. So why would you join the union after you've got into trouble? And this is going to sound really cheesy, but I see it more as a gym membership. You go, you get as much in as you put out. If you don't go to the gym, you're not going to get fitter. And if you don't join your uni and be active within it, you're not going to make things better at work. And yes, it's not quite right. It needs some tweaking, but I do think it's much better than talking about an insurance company because I'm definitely not an insurance broker as a general secretary, let's put it that way. And I don't think it is adapting to the modern workforce. I think we've just I don't think the movement's adapted to the removal of having to be in the union and, it just being something that you do. When legislation changed, we just carried on, expecting the same results, if I'm being totally honest. And what I think's happened is the economy has changed whilst we've looked at it and watched it do so. And for many of us in the movement, there's a frustration around that. That's why we're not where we need to be in the gig economy. It's why we're seen as we'll just swoop in and save the day. And if you don't want to stay in your job, just move on to a next one. It'll be fine. Rather than encouraging this, well, actually, you can enact change if you come together collectively. And I know, through knowing Henry and working with him on Organise Now, we've tried to change some of that with worker to worker organising so that people know that they are the union from day one, not an official coming in to save the day, but actually coming together collectively around an issue, organising around that issue, whatever it may be. Going back to the bread analogy, could just be to get free food on a break, or it could be something really severe around sexual harassment or worse. Organising collectively around that and understanding the power you have coming together is something that we've not done enough of as a movement, and we're starting that again, and there is shoots of that, in some of the big unions in pockets, and in some little unions that, maybe aren't TUC affiliated, for example. But we've got to do more of it because workers in the modern workplace that just move from one crap job to another don't see the relevance of unions. But what they do see the relevance is when they come together collectively around an issue and deal with it. And we've got to link that. We've got to link that up, I think.
Henry,
Yeah, I think there's undoubtedly been a large acceptance and movement towards a servicing model, and there has been the adoption of the language of becoming organising trade unions as a fig leaf, really, for that targeted recruitment campaigning work we said, rather than what I think that organising looks like. But again, we have to set this in the context of what's happened to the movement and what's happened politically. Largely, trade unions, after the assault on trade union rights, the privatization, neoliberal changes of our economy, all of that coincided with a period after, what's known as that unsuccessful miners' strike, the successful one of the 70s, often overlooked. But that was a huge loss to the trade union movement. And it was lost for lots of reasons. And there are fantastic academics and activists who could give you verse on why that is. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but I will say that the solidarity of other working class people and other people coming out and joining that strike, I think potentially could have been a more powerful solution than what happened, and those miners were isolated. And I think what they achieved was incredible, and the fact that we talk about it today as a lesson and also links to the current strike at the National Coal Mining Museum, which is led by those workers that were on strike that now do museum tours. There's something about its workers make history, as the London May Day theme is for this year. But what I want to say is that anti-trade union legislation, the neoliberal changes within our economy, society, everything, there's no such thing as society. We're all individuals now. Largely, trade unions from that period onwards have kind of battened down the hatches. Lots of trade unions in the public sector lost collective bargaining rights where they had them, whether it be from education and others, and moved to review body systems where unions contribute alongside other actors to say this is what pay should be. So fundamentally, that loss of the collective bargaining arrangements and the power that workers had in that what's known as the heyday of trade unions has largely been eroded. But also, we have to be honest that in that period, trade unions moved away from things like strikes. They look to social partnership with employers. They look to knocking the edges of bad policy from governments and not taking or not facilitating and not moving forward with coordinated strike action across different levels. And like I said, that defeat of the miners' strike, I think, plays into a real deep-seated emotional problem around taking industrial action. And when you look at the amount of days lost in strike action, 79 obviously being the biggest high point, and some in the 80s, and then a complete drop-off to kind of negligible. And obviously that's not the only measure of class struggle within our society, but it is a measure. And then you move to the 22, 23, that movement away from the strike as a tactic, and that move away from trying to take on the employer and batten down the hatches and making sure that we continue to be a trade union, but don't take the fight to what at the time was a government that had attacked all of our rights, has coincided with that decline in membership. So those things are inherently linked. But all of that then led to, we need to move to a service model, which means we need to recruit more people, which means cheaper off. We need to show how we work with employers and governments to improve people's lives, rather than actually we understand the employee relationship, and that there is a class dynamic within that, and that there's a struggle within that inherently, and a power dynamic that we must at all times acknowledge. And it ultimately, what became the role of the trade union was to navigate that period as best it could. And we saw a revival of what could have been a huge coordinated strike in 22, 23. But you saw the power of it, didn't you? Not just the media obsessed with getting Mick Lynch on every single show, but people talking about trade unions again, and that kind of buzz and that excitement. And as Ranjit said earlier, through the action that NAPO have taken, you saw like the National Education Union, 50,000 members. Now, taking a servicing approach, you could give out 20 million squidgy balls at recruitment fairs. You're never going to reach 50,000 members. So it shows you and proves that. And the thousands of new workplace activists and reps they recruited during that fantastic industrial action campaigns. This is where GFTU plays a role. There is for us, there is a lack of acknowledgement about how people use the organising model creatively around the world. We, and myself, I'm as guilty of this as ever. Every week there's a new book out from the United States and North America about organising theory and strategy, and people like me probably consume those books as much as quickly as we can. But actually we neglect the large organisational strategy that other unions in other contexts having. In our next strategy series session, GFTU, we've got Ashok Dwivedi talking about the largest strike in human history from India. Now, the British Labour movement has largely moved away or not even really acknowledged that, but only in small pockets. But the servicing model is deeper than just the decline of the trade union movement, and is deeper than just moving away from the strike as tactic that can build power and build a sense of purpose in our movement. It's about fundamentally now we're at a place where people often use the term organising, and some adopt theories from noted speakers about this is how we organise. And my philosophy has been that there is definitely a bad way to organise, but I'm not sure there is one way best to organise.
Anything to add, Ranjit?
Yeah, I think Sarah and Henry have probably covered most of it, but I think Henry touches on a really important point around the legislative framework. I mean, over the past few decades in the UK, the legislative environment has been increasingly restrictive. The laws around strike ballots, turnout thresholds, picketing, and political campaigning, have made it more difficult for unions to organise and take that collective action compared to many other democratic countries. These restrictions don't just affect the unions, they affect the balance of power in the workplace itself. When workers face more barriers to organising collectively, it becomes harder to challenge those unsafe conditions, the excessive workloads, or poor employment practices. So it undermines that ability to show solidarity and to act collectively. Necessity, I think, as a result of that, some unions have shifted in part towards a servicing model, where we're just relying on providing representation, legal support, and individual casework by paid officials. And yeah, those services do matter. Members expect them and they deserve them. But if unions only act as service providers, we lose what makes trade unions powerful, and that is collective organisation and self-organisation. If we want to move towards a organising model, we need to create the space and the opportunity for members to self-organise, to touch and take forward the campaigns that they see as being important, and then they can, I've just come from a meeting this morning of the NAPO Black Network. It was really well attended. There was lots of discussion there. We were talking about how we were going to mobilise and support the pay ballot and take the pay ballot discussions forward. And I think it's be able to create those spaces for people to engage with the union through self-organisation that it sort of creates a more powerful union.
So, if you had to create a strategy for the next decade for the labour movement, what would you prioritise? Let's go with Sarah first.
I would prioritise listening to workers and the working class about what they wanted to collectivise around. But I think we really need to look at how we organise, how we build. We've mentioned worker to worker organising. We've mentioned that there isn't kind of a silver bullet one way to organise everyone. So I think our strategy for the next decade has got to be focusing on listening to our members and the issues that working class people are facing, working together as a movement, not in silos. So where we can do things like the Right to Food campaign, like coming together collectively to support the strikers in Birmingham, things like that. We need to do more of that. connecting issues, so linking workplaces with things that are going on in communities. We've just got to kind of start as again, really start from the basics, start again, build up as though we're starting from day one. Because whenever I ask the question, if you started your trade union today, would it look like it does? Nobody ever says yes.
What do you think, Ranjit?
I think Sarah makes all the arguments. I think we do need to bring class back into politics, and I think we need to mobilize people to give them the confidence to get engaged within political processes, and the trade union can play a part in that as well. And I think that's what we as trade unions should be doing. But on the other side, I also think, we talked about the legislative framework, and I think, we do need to improve the legislative framework so we can help strengthen workplace democracy, whether that includes simplifying the industrial action ballot requirements, strengthening protection for union representatives and organisers, giving unions greater rights to access, what Sarah was saying, to workplaces and communicate with workers. We need to go into those sectors that traditionally or have recently not been organised and unionised. And for me as well, I would say we need to connect our workplace struggles with wider social issues, particularly in public services like probation, where staff conditions directly affect public safety and outcomes.
And Henry?
So I think ultimately we need to be campaigning clearly for the introduction of collective bargaining for all workers. And we need to see a removal of all restrictions around secondary action. We need industrial unity as a step change towards the building of industrial unions. Now, this is the hard one because we're in a multi-union landscape. But the idea that we build industrial unity and we have one position to the employer, whoever that may be, we're not there to be the mattress between capital and labour. We are there to win a better world. We are facing historic levels of declining standards of living. Our lives for our children and grandchildren look extremely bleak at the moment, whilst the rich are getting richer. We have to ultimately answer that question, and we're the largest democratic organisations in the country to be able to address that. We need to look at the strategic organising model, organising workers in key choke points and supply chains within global capitalism, and use that power in a coordinated way so that if we are unable, for instance, to negotiate the best approach to AI, that we're able to prevent it. And that means having that longer term and international work. And finally, solidarity action. And that is why the mega pickets in Birmingham and other activities that are at the edges of what the law allows us to do. But trade unions are nonetheless saying, if you make the laws that restrictive, we'll have no choice but to break them. And that solidarity action is standing with people as a class, regardless of which union they're in and regardless of what sector, is fundamentally how we look to rebuild a united movement that can win.
A huge thank you to Sarah, Henry, and Ranjit for bringing their honesty and experience to this discussion. If there's one thread running through everything you've heard today, it's that trade unions don't just exist, they are built, shaped, and driven by the people in them. And the future of the movement won't be decided by strategy alone, but by workers feeling confident enough to act together. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow, share, and keep the conversation going.